Conclave Station Vareth 9 was not a beautiful place, but it was an important one. It floated in the dark at the edge of the shattered arm, a wide stretch of space where stars were old and dim, and where the light from dying suns gave everything a faint amber color. The station was massive. It had been built over many generations by many species, and every time someone new joined the conclave, they added something to the structure. A new ring, a new dock, as a new corridor full of smells and sounds that no other species could quite understand. From the outside, it looked like a pile of mismatched pieces somehow held together by agreement and necessity. From the inside, it felt exactly the same. Ships came and went every hour. Diplomats in robes and armor walked the long corridors. Traders argued over prices in languages that clashed against each other like stones. Scientists carried equipment. Soldiers stood watch. And everyone on Vareth 9 had a purpose, and almost everyone had a rank. And on a station like this, rank was the most important thing a person could carry. Sarah Voss carried none. She was Dracani, a species that most of the galaxy knew and respected, sometimes out of genuine admiration, more often out of careful fear. The Dracani were tall, scaled, and ancient. They had spread across 6 star systems through centuries of war and trade. They had fire in their blood, or so the old stories said, and then the best of them could breathe actual flame in combat. A rare gift, but a real one, and one that every Dracani child prayed they would be born with. Sarah had not been born with it. She had hatched quiet and cold, without even a wisp of smoke, and by the time she was old enough to understand what that meant, she already knew the word for what she was: emberless. The Dracani had a long and ungentle tradition of sorting their people by bloodline and ability, and those born without fire sat at the very bottom of that order. They were not cast out, not exactly, but they were made to feel the weight of their difference every single day. On Vareth 9, Sarah worked as a station aide for the Dracani High delegation. That meant she carried things, filed documents, kept records, and stayed out of the way. The members of the delegation were high-blood Dracani, proud and polished, and then they spoke to her the way someone might speak to a piece of furniture, only when they needed something moved. She had been on the station for 3 months. In that time, no one had asked her name. The mid-ring cafeteria was the largest eating space on Vareth 9. It was open to every species, which in theory meant it was a place of equality, and in practice meant it was a map of exactly who had power and who did not. Species clustered together by instinct and habit. The Vethari, tall, silver-skinned, and always composed, took the tables near the wide observation windows. The Karath traders sat close to the exits, because they were always half ready to leave. The various smaller species filled the middle ground, careful not to take anything that a larger group might want. The Dracani delegation always sat at the long table near the north wall. It was not the best table in any practical sense, but it was the one they had claimed on the first day, and no one had argued with them about it, which made it the best table in every sense that mattered to them. Sarah was not allowed to sit there. She had tried, in her first week, out of simple logic. She was Dracani, after all, and they were Dracani, and there were empty seats. The look she received from the nearest delegation member had been enough to make her understand that she would not try again. Since then, she had been eating alone at a small table near the back, away from the windows, and away from the warmth, where the recycled air smelled faintly of machine oil. On the day everything changed, Sarah had been later than usual to the cafeteria. There had been documents to refile after one of the senior delegates had scattered them across the floor without looking at her. She had not eaten since the morning. By the time she arrived and loaded her tray, just a bowl of warm grain paste and a small cup of something amber and sweet, she was tired in the kind of way that lives behind the eyes. She was walking toward her usual small table when one of the junior delegates stuck out his foot. It was not an accident. He had been watching her come. He did it with a small smile, and when her tray hit the floor and the bowl cracked and the food spread across the pale gray tiles, he laughed. It was a sharp sound, and it brought the attention of the others at the delegation table. Two more of them laughed. One of them said something in old Draconi, something about an emberless creature not being able to carry even a tray, and the laughter spread a little further. Sarah stood very still. She did not look up. She had learned not to look up, because looking up meant meeting their eyes, and meeting their eyes meant she was inviting more. She just stood there, looking at the broken bowl and the ruined food on the floor. Around the cafeteria, other species noticed. A group of Karath traders glanced over, then looked away. A Vethari diplomat at the window table turned her long silver head, observed the situation for a moment with calm yellow eyes, and then returned to her meal without expression. A few smaller species near the middle tables shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. Sarah knelt down slowly and began picking up the pieces of the broken bowl. Her hands were steady. She had practiced that, keeping her hands steady. Inside, she felt the familiar burn of something that was not fire, because she had no fire. It was just the small, endless ache of being made to feel like nothing in a room full of people. She did not cry. She had learned not to do that either. She was still crouched on the floor, setting the broken pieces to one side, when she heard footsteps coming toward her. Not the hard, deliberate steps of a Draconi, but something lighter. She did not look up at first. She had no reason to expect anything good from footsteps moving in her direction. But the steps stopped right beside her, and when she finally lifted her eyes, she saw a human standing there. He was young, younger than she had expected from anyone walking with that kind of quiet purpose. He had a plain face, short dark hair, and the kind of work clothes that people wore when they spent their days moving supplies and checking lists. He was not large. He was not impressive. He was carrying 2 food trays, and he was looking at her not with pity exactly, but with something calm and direct that she did not have a word for. He set the fuller tray down on the floor in front of her. Then he lowered himself to one knee, settled his own tray on his lap, and looked at her with a small, easy expression, as if this were the most normal thing in the world. "Eat with me," he said. The cafeteria went very quiet. Sarah stared at him. She did not move. She did not know what to do with what was happening, because in all her time on Vareth 9 and in all her years before that, nothing like this had ever happened to her. The human just looked at her, calm as still water, and waited. His name was Danny Carr, and he was from a small town in Ohio. Not that anyone on Vareth 9 knew where Ohio was, or particularly cared. Humans were still a relatively new presence in the wider galaxy, present enough to be given a seat at the conclave table, not established enough for anyone to take them very seriously. They were soft-skinned and short-lived, and had arrived at interstellar travel later than nearly every other species currently sitting in the mid-ring cafeteria. Most of the aliens on the station regarded humans the way one might regard a new and slightly puzzling neighbor. Not dangerous, probably harmless, but not entirely sure what to make of them yet. Danny was 24 years old. He worked in the station's supply coordination office, which meant he spent most of his days checking cargo manifests, tracking shipments, and making sure the right equipment ended up in the right docking bay at the right time. It was not glamorous work. He had been on Vareth 9 for 11 weeks, and in that time he had learned the basic layout of the station, where to get decent coffee from the small human canteen near the East Corridor, and how to say, "Please check again," in 3 different alien languages. He had not intended to start anything when he walked into the cafeteria that afternoon. He had been hungry. He had been thinking about whether a supply manifest from Bay 7 had been filed correctly. He had been thinking about nothing important, and then he had seen a girl sitting on the floor with a broken bowl in front of her. He saw a table full of scaled aliens laughing, and a whole room full of everyone else looking carefully in the opposite direction. He had stood there for a moment, just a moment. He was not the kind of person who made fast, dramatic decisions. He thought things through mostly, but this particular situation did not seem to require much thought. Someone was on the floor. Nobody was helping. That felt wrong in a way that was very simple and very clear. And Danny had always had trouble ignoring things that felt wrong in a clear and simple way. He went to the food counter. He loaded one tray with what looked warmest, a bowl of something that smelled like broth, a thick piece of flat bread, a small dish of something sweet and yellow, a cup of hot liquid. He loaded his own tray with less because he had not been sitting on the floor without food, and she had. Then he walked back across the cafeteria to where the girl was still crouched on the floor, picking up pieces of broken bowl with careful, steady hands. He set the fuller tray down in front of her. He got down on one knee. He looked at her. She was looking up at him now, her amber eyes wide and very still, the way an animal looks when it is not yet sure if something is a threat. And he said the only thing that made sense to say. "Eat with me." The silence that followed was the loudest kind. Not empty, but full of the attention of every creature in that room who had just turned to look without meaning to. Danny could feel it, the way you feel a change in the air before a storm. He did not look around. He kept his eyes on the girl and kept his expression easy, the way his grandfather had always kept his when something uncomfortable needed to be walked through calmly. The Dracani delegation was staring at him. He could see them at the edge of his vision, large, scaled, and deeply unhappy. The one who had tripped her was watching him with something between confusion and contempt. Danny did not look at him. He just nudged the tray a little closer to the girl and picked up his own food. She had not moved yet. Her hands were still holding the broken pieces of bowl. Her eyes were on his face, searching for something. For the trick, maybe, or the cruelty hiding behind the gesture. Because in her experience, gestures like this always had something mean at the center of them. There was nothing mean in his face. He was just eating. He broke off a piece of his flat bread and chewed it, unhurried, as if they were already in the middle of a normal meal, and the only thing left was for her to catch up. Slowly, so slowly it looked like it cost her something, Sarah set the broken pieces aside. She reached out and pulled the tray toward her. Her hands were not quite steady anymore, which was the only sign she gave of how much was happening inside her. She ate. Neither of them spoke for a while. The cafeteria found its noise again gradually, the way a room does when the interesting thing has passed and people return to their own business. But it did not return fully. There was still a current of awareness moving through the space, looks exchanged over shoulders, quiet words between table mates. Something had shifted, and the room knew it, even if no one could have said exactly what. Danny finished his broth and looked over at her. "I'm Danny," he said. "Supply Office, Bay Coordination." She looked at him for a moment. "Sarah," she said. Her voice was low and a little rough, the way voices get when they have not been used much. "I am a station aide for the delegation." He nodded as if this were a perfectly ordinary introduction between equals. "Have you tried the yellow stuff?" he asked, nodding at the small dish on her tray. It tastes weird at first, but it's actually good." She looked at the dish. She looked at him. Something moved across her face that was not quite a smile, more like the memory of one, or the beginning of one that had not quite decided to arrive yet. She tried the yellow thing. Her expression shifted slightly. "It is sweet," she said, as if surprised. "Yeah," Danny said. "Found it by accident 3 weeks ago. Nobody told me what it was. Still don't know. But it's good." They ate the rest of the meal in a quiet that was not uncomfortable. Around them, the station moved on. The Dracani delegation did not laugh again. The Vithari diplomat near the window did not look over a second time. But the space around the two of them, a human technician and an emberless dragon girl sitting on the floor of the mid-ring cafeteria, felt different from the rest of the room. Warmer, maybe. Smaller, in a good way. In Dracani culture, sharing a meal was not a casual thing. It was a statement. It meant acknowledgement. It meant that the person beside you had worth, that you were willing to be seen with them, that your presence was a form of protection. It was the oldest gesture of alliance in a culture built on hierarchy and fire. Sarah knew this, Danny did not. But the thing about human kindness, the strange, quiet, stubborn kind, was that it did not need to know the rules to follow them. It just did what made sense, and then left the meaning to everyone else to work out. When they were done, Danny picked up both trays, stood, and gave her a simple nod. "See you around, Sarah," he said, and walked toward the tray return like nothing remarkable had happened at all. Sarah sat on the floor for a moment longer. The broken bowl was still beside her. The cafeteria was still full of noise. Nothing had changed, technically, except that someone had said her name, like it mattered. She stood up, straightened her uniform, and then walked back to her small table near the back. She sat down. She looked at the wall in front of her. For the first time in a long time, she did not feel entirely alone. Word traveled fast on a space station. There was something about closed spaces. All those corridors and shared eating rooms and recycled air moving through the same vents that made information move like smoke. By the morning after Danny had knelt on the cafeteria floor beside Sarah, and almost everyone in the mid-ring knew what had happened. By midday, it had reached the outer corridors. By evening, it had arrived at the offices of the Dracani High Delegation, carried there by a junior aide with a nervous expression and a careful way of delivering bad news. High Fang Dorath Vel had been on Verath 9 for 4 months, and in that time he had handled trade negotiations, border disputes, and a very tense argument with the Vethari over docking fees. He was old by Dracani standards, broad-shouldered, with deep scars along the left side of his jaw from a conflict no one asked about directly. He wore his rank the way mountains wear height, without effort, without announcement, as a simple and permanent fact of existence. He listened to the report about the human without expression. Then he sent for Danny Carr. Danny arrived at the delegation's formal meeting room the next morning with his work tablet under his arm, and because he had honestly not been sure if this was a professional meeting or something else. The room was large and cold and decorated in Dracani style, dark stone-colored walls, the delegation's crest mounted high, chairs built for bigger bodies than his. He sat in the one indicated and waited. Dorath Vel entered without ceremony and stood at the head of the long table. He looked at Danny for a long moment, the way something very old looks at something very new, not with cruelty, but with a kind of deep, unmoved assessment. "You are the human from the supply office," he said. His galactic standard was precise and had no warmth in it. "Yes," Danny said. "You involved yourself in a matter that was not yours," Dorath Vel said. "The aide, the emberless one. What happened in the cafeteria was an internal matter, a matter of our custom and our order. You did not understand this, and so perhaps you can be forgiven for acting without knowledge. But I am telling you now, so that you will not act without knowledge again." Danny was quiet for a moment. He held the tablet in his lap and thought about how to say what he wanted to say. He was not angry. He was not scared either, which surprised him a little. "I understand what you're telling me," he said, "and I'm not trying to challenge your customs. I don't know all of them, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise." He paused. "But I have a question, if that's all right." Dorath Vel's eyes moved very slightly. In ask. "Is it your custom?" Danny said, keeping his voice even. For someone to sit on the floor and go hungry while others laugh at them? The room was very quiet. Even the recycled air seemed to pause. Dorath Vel looked at him for a long time. The silence stretched out and became heavy, and Danny sat in it without flinching, which was either very brave or very naive, and he was not entirely sure which. "You will keep your distance from the aide," Dorath Vel said finally, and left the room, and Danny sat there for another moment, then stood, tucked his tablet back under his arm, and walked out. That same morning, Sarah was pulled aside by a senior aide named Velsorith, a cold-eyed Dracani woman who had spent 20 years making sure everyone beneath her understood exactly where they stood. She was brief and efficient about it. She told Sarah that accepting the human's gesture had been an embarrassment to the delegation. She told her that allowing a creature of lower galactic standing to treat her like an equal was worse than the original humiliation. She told her to stay away from the human, to return to her duties without any further incidents, and to remember what she was. Sarah listened to all of it. She kept her hands still and her expression flat, and her eyes on a point just past Velsorith's left shoulder. She did not agree to stay away from Danny. She also did not say that she wasn't agreeing. And she simply said yes, in the way that meant she had heard, not the way that meant she would obey, and Velsorith, who was perceptive in many ways but had never paid close enough attention to Sarah to understand how she used silences, appeared satisfied. The interesting thing was what happened with the humans. Danny had not told anyone what he did. He had not made a point of it, had not sat down with his co-workers and explained his reasoning or asked for their support. And he had eaten lunch with a girl on the floor, said goodbye, and gone back to work. But the people who worked near him were perceptive in their own way, and a few of them had already heard the cafeteria story from other sources. And when Danny came back from his meeting with the Dracani delegation that morning, saying nothing about it except that it had been a bit strange, something quiet moved through the small human contingent on Varath 9. But his co-worker Laura Hines worked 2 desks away from him in the supply office. She was from Georgia, sharp-minded, and had a low tolerance for things that struck her as simply wrong. The day after the cafeteria incident, she started leaving an extra chair at the human table during meals. She did not announce this. She just moved the chair over and left it there, and when Sarah came into the cafeteria and stood for a moment with her tray, clearly uncertain, Laura caught her eye and gave a small nod toward the empty seat. Sarah sat, not immediately. She stood there a moment longer than was comfortable, but she sat. A human security officer named Owen Blake started greeting Sarah by name whenever he passed her in the corridors. This was not a small thing on Varath 9, where the default for lower-rank station aides was to be invisible to everyone above a certain level. But Owen Blake was not above any level in particular. He was a mid-rank officer doing regular patrols. But he had a loud, friendly voice and a complete lack of self-consciousness about using it. "Morning, Sarah," he would say, and move on. It was nothing. It was a word in a corridor. But on a station where status was armor, being seen was a kind of protection, and being greeted by name in a public space by someone in uniform was the sort of thing that other species noticed and filed away quietly. And the Karath traders near the middle table started making a little more room when Sarah walked through. The small, insect-like Thressie who ran one of the East Corridor food stalls started giving her an extra portion without being asked, explaining nothing. None of these people had talked to each other about it. None of them had organized. They were just humans, doing small things in the way that humans seem to do, not loudly, not heroically, but with a persistent, low-level stubbornness that was starting to change the temperature of the room. The Dracani delegation noticed. They did not like it, but they had not yet found a way to object to someone greeting an aide by name in a hallway, or to an empty chair at a lunch table, or to an extra scoop of food from a small vendor stall. Small things were hard to fight. That was the trouble with them. Sarah noticed all of it. She did not speak of it. She kept her head down and her work done and her expression carefully neutral in all the places that required it. But in the evenings, when she sat alone near the observation deck and watched the amber light of the dying star move slowly across the dark, she thought about it. She thought about what it felt like to have someone say her name like it was worth saying. She thought about the human with the 2 food trays, who had knelt on a cafeteria floor like it cost him nothing. She did not yet know that it was going to cost him something, but she was starting to think, quietly and carefully, that she was not going to let it cost him alone. The crisis arrived without warning, the way most real crises do. It started as a small problem. A note in the station's transit manifest marked "discrepancy unresolved," and then spread outward the way a crack in glass spreads, quietly at first and then all at once. 6 ships waiting in Varath 9's docking bays were cleared for departure, but a navigation component critical to safe passage through the shattered arm could not be located in the station's supply inventory. Without it, the route guidance systems on all 6 vessels would be operating on incomplete data. The arm was not a forgiving stretch of space. Incomplete data there meant missed coordinates, and missed coordinates meant ships flying into debris fields or worse. The Conclave station commander was a Vethari named Consul Yeth, composed, thorough, and deeply unhappy about anything that disrupted the station's orderly function. She ordered a full audit of the supply logs within the hour. Every department on Varath 9 was pulled into it. The humans in the supply coordination office were no exception. Danny spent most of the next 2 days pulling records and cross-checking cargo arrivals with filed manifests. He was good at this kind of work. Patient, careful, willing to read the same document 4 times if something in it didn't add up. But the data was old and layered, and had been filed by at least 6 different departments over several months, and the discrepancy was buried somewhere deep in it. By the end of the 2nd day, his whole team was tired and still without an answer. Sarah had not been asked to help with any of this. She was a station aide for the Dracani delegation, not a supply officer. The audit was not her responsibility. A Consul Yeth's formal investigation had not extended to her. She had no official reason to be involved, but Sarah had a habit that she had never been praised for and had never spoken about to anyone. In the quiet hours, the late-night shifts when the delegation members were in their quarters and the corridors were empty and there was no one to watch her or mock her or remind her of what she was, she went to the station's logistics archive room and she read. She read manifests. She read cargo logs, she read routing data and docking schedules and transit records. She had been doing it since her first week on the station, not because anyone told her to, not for any reward, but because she found it interesting. Data told stories. A transit record told you where something had been, what it weighed, who had signed for it, which hands had touched it. Sarah liked the stories that most people were too busy or too proud to read. She had seen the navigation component discrepancy before the crisis began. She had seen it 3 weeks ago, tucked into a refiled cargo transfer note from Bay 12, where a batch of supply shipments from a Karath trading vessel had been logged under a category code that did not match the components inside. It had struck her as odd. She had noted it mentally and told herself she would look more closely when she had time. And then her days had filled up again with the delegation's demands, and she had not gone back. She went back now. It took her most of the 2nd night. She sat in the archive room with the station's dim maintenance lighting and a cup of cold amber tea and went through every connected record she could find. The component had not been lost. It had been mislabeled at intake, recatalogued under the wrong supply code, and physically stored in a section of Bay 4 that no one had searched because no one had thought to look there. The data trail was there. It was just buried under 3 layers of clerical error and 2 separate filing systems that had not been updated to talk to each other properly. When she had the full picture, the location, the intake date, the chain of custody errors, she sat very still for a moment and thought about what to do with it. The right thing to do was bring it to Consul Yeth's office. That was the official channel. That was what the process said. But Sarah was a low-rank aide with no formal clearance in the supply division, and walking into the Vethari station commander's office uninvited with a stack of data that the entire investigation team had missed was the kind of thing that could be dismissed very quickly by people who had decided she was not the sort of person whose findings were worth taking seriously. That she needed someone who would be heard. She went to Danny's office before the morning shift began. He was already there, which did not surprise her. He had been coming in early every day since the crisis started. He looked tired. He had a cup of something hot in his hand and a screen full of transit records open in front of him, and when she knocked on the open door, he looked up with the expression of someone who was hoping for a solution and had not expected it to arrive like this. She showed him what she had found. She walked him through it quietly, pointing to each data point, explaining the chain of misfiling, showing him where the component was physically sitting and why it had not been found. Danny listened carefully. He asked 2 questions, both sharp and clear, the kind that cut to the center of a problem, and then he closed his screen and stood up. "Okay," he said. "Let's go." "You understand," Sarah said carefully, "that I do not have authorization to bring this directly to—" "I do," Danny said, "but I do. Come with me. You're going to explain what you found, and I'm going to make sure the right people are listening when you do." He was very clear about one thing when they arrived at Consul Yeth's office, and then again when the Vethari official called in the investigation lead, and again when the supply division senior officer was brought into the room. Each time, Danny said the same thing in the same uncomplicated way. "Sarah Voss found this. Sarah Voss has the full data trail. Let her explain it." He said it without hesitation. He said it like it was obvious. He said it the way people say things they have not thought to question. The component was recovered from Bay 4 within 2 hours. All 6 ships were cleared for departure by afternoon. Consul Yeth noted Sarah's contribution formally in the station's official record. Not a grand ceremony, but just a line in a document, the kind that would be filed and referenced and would exist permanently in the station's history. But it was the first time a Dracani aide of Sarah's rank had ever been cited in a conclave document. And on a station where such things were read carefully by people with long memories, it was not a small line. That evening, Danny found Sarah on the observation deck. She was standing at the wide window, looking out at the amber light and the dark. She had been there for a while. He came and stood beside her, and for a moment they both just looked at the stars. "Can I ask you something?" he said. She looked at him. "Yes." "The emberless thing. What does it actually mean? I know it's important. I just don't know what it means for you." She was quiet for a while. The kind of quiet that was not empty but full of something being carefully organized. Then she told him. She told him about hatching cold. She told him about what fire meant to the Dracani, not just in combat, but as a sign of worth, a sign that your blood was strong, that you carried something ancient and real inside you. She told him about the old laws that said emberless children should not leave their homeworld, and how she had only been permitted to come to Vareth 9 as an aide because the delegation needed someone to carry things and file documents, and no one else had been available. And she told him that her own people considered her incomplete, not broken, just unfinished, a dragon without the most important part. She told him all of it the way you tell someone something when you have not told anyone before, and you are not entirely sure you will survive the telling. Danny was quiet for a long time after she finished. "Back on Earth," he said eventually. "The people who built the first rockets, the ones that actually got us into space. Most of them were told it was a waste of time, that it couldn't be done, that they were not the right kind of people to be attempting it." He paused. The people who changed everything were almost never the ones with the most obvious fire. Sarah looked at him for a moment. Then she looked back at the stars. She did not have a response to that. Not yet. But she kept his words somewhere deep and quiet. In the place where things go that are too important to look at directly right away. Outside, the amber star continued its slow and patient dying. And somewhere in Bay 4, a navigation component sat in its correct place at last, ready to guide 6 ships safely through the dark. The conclave's closing ceremony was the kind of event that the station took seriously. It had been organized for weeks. The central atrium, the largest open space on Verith 9, a wide and high-ceilinged room built to make every species feel appropriately small, had been arranged with long rows of seats facing a raised platform. Banners in the colors of every member species hung from the upper level. The lighting was warm and deliberate. Security officers stood at the edges in clean uniforms. There was a program, printed in 7 languages, that listed every delegation's address in careful order. Everyone who mattered on the station was there. The Vithari consul and her full staff sat in the front rows, composed as always, their long silver hands folded neatly. The Karath traders filled one whole section, louder than usual, because closing ceremonies meant the official end of trade negotiations, and most of them had done well. The smaller species spread through the middle seating in quiet clusters. The Dracani High Delegation occupied a block of seats near the platform, close to the front, because rank was rank even at a ceremony. Then Danny sat in the human section near the back. Laura was beside him. Owen Blake was 2 rows ahead. There were maybe 30 humans on Verith 9 in total, and most of them had come, because closing ceremonies were the kind of thing you attended when you were still new enough to the galaxy to find it remarkable. Sarah was not in the human section. She was standing a little apart from the Dracani delegation, in the side area where aides and support staff were expected to watch from. Close enough to be available, but not close enough to be included. She stood straight and still, her hands at her sides, the way she had learned to stand in public, present but invisible, occupying as little space as possible. The ceremony moved through its program in the expected order. Consul Yeth spoke first, as station commander, in the measured and official tones of a Vethari official who had given many such addresses and found them all equally appropriate. Other delegations followed, and trade agreements were summarized. Border resolutions were acknowledged. Symbolic gifts were exchanged. It was formal and important and, after the first hour, somewhat predictable. The Dracani High Delegation's address was near the end. High Fang Dorath Vel walked to the platform with the slow, deliberate weight of someone who has never once hurried for anyone. He was in full delegation dress, dark, scaled armor, the crest of his house on his chest, his old scars visible and unashamed. And he spoke for several minutes about the delegation's work during the conclave, about trade routes agreed and territories respected, about the long relationship between the Dracani and the wider galactic community. It was a strong address. He was a capable speaker. He said everything expected of him with precision and authority. And then he paused. It was not a pause built into the program. The room felt it immediately. That slight shift in the air when something unplanned is about to happen. Consul Yeth's calm yellow eyes moved to the platform with a fraction more attention. The Karath traders went a little quieter. The humans in the back rows exchanged glances. Dorath Vel turned his head and looked into the side area where the aides were standing. "Sarah Voss," he said, his voice carried easily in the atrium. "Come forward." Nothing moved for a moment. Then Sarah stepped out from the group of aides and walked to the center of the floor, below the platform. She moved carefully, as if she was not sure the ground would hold her. Her face was very still. Dorath Vel looked down at her from the platform. He was a large creature, and the platform gave him more height still, and yet there was something in how he held himself in that moment that was not quite the same as how he had held himself during the rest of the ceremony. Something that looked, very slightly, like the effort of honesty. He spoke in Old Draconi first, and the words were formal and structured, the kind of formal that belonged to ancient occasions, not to ordinary speech. Only the Draconi in the room understood them completely, but the tone carried, the way certain tones always carry regardless of language. Then he repeated it in Galactic Standard, so the record would be clear, and so the whole station could understand. He said that Sarah Voss, station aide of the Draconi delegation, and had demonstrated a quality that her people's oldest tradition recognized above bloodline and above fire. He used the old form of address, not the word for aid, not the word for low blood, but a word that translated roughly to one who has shown what they are made of. He said that her work during the station crisis had protected the delegation's ships and the ships of 5 other species. He said that the Draconi High Delegation formally recognized her contribution, and then formally acknowledged her worth in front of the conclave and the station record. He said it without apology and without explanation, as if it were simply true and had been true all along, and all that had been required was for someone to finally say it aloud. The atrium was very quiet. Sarah stood on the floor below the platform and said nothing. She could not have spoken if she tried. She was holding herself very still the way she always did in difficult moments. But this time, it was not to hide something. It was to keep hold of something. Something that was happening inside her that she had not felt in so long she almost could not name it. In the human section at the back, Danny watched. He had not known this was coming. He had not arranged it, had not spoken to Dorath Vel, had not done anything in the past week except work his regular shifts and eat lunch at the table with Laura and Owen, and when she came, with Sarah. And he was not responsible for what was happening on the platform. This was Dorath Vel's choice, made in whatever private accounting the old Draconi had done over the past several weeks. Danny was just watching, the way you watch something that is happening the way it was always supposed to happen, even if it took longer than it should have. Laura leaned over. "Is she okay?" she said quietly, watching Sarah's stillness. "Yeah," Danny said. I think she's okay." When the address ended and the ceremony moved to its final formalities, Sarah made her way through the crowd to where the humans were seated. She did not plan it. Her feet just carried her there, the same way her feet had slowly, over the past weeks, found their way to that table in the cafeteria. She found Danny at the edge of the section, and she stood beside him while the last official words were spoken. And when the ceremony ended and the atrium filled with movement and noise, she did not move away. "He used the old address," she said quietly. "I did not think he knew it still." "What does it mean exactly?" Danny asked. She thought about it. "It means the way you say it to someone who you thought was one thing, and then you understood they were another thing entirely. And you are saying, in front of everyone, that you were wrong about what you thought they were." She paused. "It is not easy to say, for a Draconi, especially one like him." Danny nodded. "Sounds about right," he said. Later, the Vethari consul was heard remarking to one of her aides that humans were a genuinely unusual species. They had no great fire, no ancient bloodlines, no towering fleet record, and yet they seemed to have an instinct for finding exactly the place where cruelty was quietly keeping something down, and then doing something so small and so direct that it was impossible to argue with. Not a battle, not a declaration, just a person on a floor, just a chair left open, just a name said in a hallway. She said she was not sure if it was wisdom or stubbornness, and her aide said it might be both, and the consul considered this and said that was probably correct, and was also, perhaps, the most human answer possible. That evening, at the mid-ring cafeteria was the same as it always was, full of noise and smell and the particular chaos of many different species eating at the same time. The Draconi delegation table was in its usual place near the north wall. The Vethari were by the windows. The Karath traders were loud near the exits. Danny sat at a table near the middle of the room, not the back, not the edges, just the middle, where the light was decent and there was room for everyone. Laura was across from him. Owen had pulled up a chair on the end. There were a couple of others from the human contingent who had wandered over. Sarah came in with her tray, stood for a moment and looked at the table. There was an empty seat. There was always an empty seat now. Laura had made sure of that some weeks ago, quietly and without ceremony, the way the humans seemed to do most things. Sarah sat down. Nobody made a speech about it. Nobody marked the occasion. Danny passed her the small dish of yellow sweet stuff from the center of the table because she had mentioned once that she liked it. And that was the kind of thing he remembered. The station turned slowly around its dying amber star. 6 ships had cleared the shattered arm safely. A name had been spoken in front of an entire conclave. And in the middle of a noisy cafeteria on a station at the edge of the galaxy, as a group of unremarkable humans ate dinner with a dragon girl who had finally found a seat at the table. Not because they were powerful, not because they had won anything, only because they had made room. And on a station like Verath 9, in a galaxy like this one, that turned out to be enough.